Kara Oosterhuis here with RealAgriculture.com. Happy Tuesday. We are back here today with another RealAg live episode. So if you are watching on YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Facebook, wherever you're watching, please participate. Put your comments in, put your questions in, and we will get to them as soon as we can. So I'm going to bring in today's guest here today. I have here with me Emmett Sawyer, who is a farmer, student, public speaker extraordinaire, whatever you want to call him. How's it going today?
Oh, it's going really good. How are you, Kara? Kara, sorry.
I no, it's all good. I'm doing well. Yeah, it's you're based in Acme, Alberta, so you're getting some of the snow today, I believe, as well. Hey.
Yes, it's crazy how much it snowed. I think we're at 15 centimeters or so. I certainly have a lot of snow plowing to do. I'm not looking forward to it, that's for sure.
So tell me a bit about some of your schooling. What are some of the things you're taking right now?
So I'm currently in my third year at the University of Lethbridge, where I'm taking agriculture enterprise management. So I guess the way I like to kind of describe it is it's a little bit like an agriculture business degree, mixed in with a bit more policy, trade, global markets, marketing your crops, and that sort of thing. So that's pretty much the gist of it. And yeah, it's been really, really good so far, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. So how has COVID impacted? It's a pretty hands-on industry we work in. I mean, a lot can be done obviously via computer and stuff, but how has COVID impacted your experience at school?
You know, I think that's been one of the most interesting parts, I think, about living through this pandemic and attending universities, is exactly like you said, how do you bring a hands-on perspective, which really is agriculture, and try to deliver it in a fully online format that the University of Lethbridge has been doing the last 4 months since September and really since the end of March as well. And that's been the tough part. And I have to give credit where credit is due to our professors in Lethbridge. They've done a phenomenal job really trying to adapt all of their classes to really try to make it the best experience possible for us students. So instead of trying to show us in person how to market grain or to market our beef animals, they've pretty much been trying to do things over with using tutorials and it's pretty much having to put in a lot more effort and a lot more time into the studies instead of rather than doing it in person. So I think that's been the main difference. Any type of project we've had to do, we've had to spend at least 3 or 4 more hours on it just because we're not able to ask the prof in the moment. So that's made things a little bit more difficult. But really, you can really tell that the profs are trying, and it's not their best scenario either. And mostly because when they're lecturing us, we don't even have our face cameras turned on either, so they're almost really talking to a brick wall. And when you're trying to talk to people, especially in a lecture, you really do need to feel people out and see, well, are my students paying attention or are they not? And I think so. I think that must be a struggle for them, but it has been different. But I'm certainly looking forward to maybe one day where we can get back to in person, though, because I think the quality of the education, despite putting in more time and more hours to try and make it better, certainly the quality is not where it used to be compared to in person. I think that really comes straight across the board as well. And I don't really know if there's a way to mitigate that at all. But that's just my opinion. We're paying the same amount dollar-wise for education with really not, I would say, really not learning as much as we could be in person, which is a bit of the downside, but there are positives. I mean, we can organize the classes when we want. We can watch our lectures when we want. So if we're more of a night person, we can watch our lectures at 9 p.m., 10 p.m. And it certainly gives students that want to have those off-farm jobs or out of school jobs, they can work through the day and study during the night. So it's kind of neat that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, I never thought of it that way. Lindsay Smith, a coworker of mine, she is also a teacher in Ottawa, and she says, as an instructor, I second this. Connecting has been really difficult using Zoom, and I can imagine it is. There's just something different about. We found even having team meetings and stuff, being able to talk, even though I'm not right beside you, that seeing somebody's a little different than just talking to the wall, like you said. So that's a very, very interesting point. So
Oh,
you, many recognize, well, some might recognize you from your podcast, Ag Thoughts with Emmett. Do you want to talk a bit about that and what encouraged you to get started with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, like you said, I have a podcast called Egg Thoughts with Emmett, and really, my I have a few different goals with that podcast. One is to really try and give my thoughts on many different types of agriculture issues. I found that I'm a fairly opinionated person on many different things, and I really also really do enjoy politics and policy. So I thought that starting a podcast might be a really great way to outline my feelings on these different agriculture topics, especially when new things are always coming out in government, and then we also have to think about other things in other markets across the world that are really fun to comment on as well. And my other goal is really to try and bring a youth perspective to agriculture. I find that sometimes youth our age sometimes have a tough time getting their opinions out on agriculture or being heard, especially in our more urban populations as well. So I find it might be kind of a really great opportunity to show, well, this is what youth, or at least this is what I'm thinking from a youth perspective on these different agriculture topics, which can really range from farm succession to even, well, how do you do value added products on your farm? And the other thing I've been doing lately is trying to host other youth on my podcast to really amplify their voice as well, because I find that some of the best conversations are had between two different people rather than just one person talking about their own opinions. It's really fun to kind of go back and forth and maybe create a little bit of friction if someone disagrees with what I'm talking about. So I find that's really awesome as well. Um, so it's been kind of neat to do that. The other aspect of thought is, I was trying to figure out, well, what's my next thing to do? After finishing up my time with 4-H, being a 4-H member, I wasn't able to, join in their public speaking competitions, and I really, really love to talk. So I thought, well, what better way than to start a podcast and really just talk for 20 minutes, half an hour, or even an hour. So it's been really, really, really enjoyable, and it's even taught me a little bit more on, well, how do you talk for longer periods of time? Because starting out with just a 5 or 6 minute speech, that's a lot different than trying to talk for half an hour and try to continue to make it interesting too. So I've learned a few things doing that podcast, and it's been completely self-taught, and that's been a whole struggle and journey in itself as well.
So, what has been your favorite interview you've done so far?
Oh geez. That's a pretty tough one. Um, I'd have to say I have two. Um, my first one being with a lady named Carly Rumpel, and she's an agronomist in Saskatchewan, and I've actually met her through my days in 4-H when I would go to different conferences in other provinces, and even we actually even went down to Brazil together to attend a conference, and that was really fun. Because we made that connection down in Brazil along with 4-H, so we were able to have a few different conversations, and it was just really enjoyable, super relaxed feeling. I thought we had a really great time. And then I think the other one that would tie it with hers was I talked to a beef producer from Alberta. His name was Matthew Trefiak, and he goes to the University of Saskatchewan. And it was there that we really had a great conversation about everything and anything to do with beef. And for me, despite growing up on a mixed grain and cattle farm, my interest really wasn't in the cattle side of things, and my knowledge doesn't go too deep in that area. Whereas he is very involved. He's extremely into showing cattle as well as creating some great cattle genetics on his farm. So I thought we had a really, really, really great conversation with anything to do with beef, especially when it came to reducing emissions and how beef animals are really great for the grasslands. So for those two would have to for sure be my two favorite podcast interviews, and they both made a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, like you said, it's as much as we always want to have people kind of around us that agree with us, in order to have a lively conversation, you almost need to find somebody that's willing to have that constructive conversation. So that's definitely an interesting part of this industry as well. Now, you did mention you traveled to Brazil for the Youth Ag Summit. Can you talk about when that was, how you got involved, and what sort of takebacks you had from that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Youth Ag Summit has been a summit that's been held every 2 years since the year of 2013, and its whole goal is to bring some of the brightest minds in agriculture to one spot to really talk about their ideas on how to feed a growing population. So it was first held in 2013 in Calgary, and I was only about 12 then. And the minimum age to go, you have to be 19. So I had a bit of time to wait, but I knew ever since I heard about it that I really, really wanted to go. So the time came, it was 2018, and they finally put out the application for it. And what you had to do is you had to come up with a project or idea that maybe you've started already, or just an idea that would solve a minimum of 3 of the United Nations sustainability goals. So for my idea, I thought it might be really cool to pretty much have a greenhouse on top of a bunch of the large warehouses and malls that are being put up, 45 minutes or an hour away. I mean, there's Cross Iron Mills that's in Balzac. There seems to be all these huge warehouses for your Amazons, these big distribution. Well, that's a lot of beautiful, beautiful farmland that's being taken away. And that's also a lot of water. If you think about how big that building is, well, usually if it rains there, the soil soaks it up. But there's all this water there. Well, where does this water go? So I thought it'd be kind of neat if I made greenhouse kits to put up on top of these warehouses that would use solar power to kind of heat them, as well as any other energy sources. And then it would actually take water from the sewer drains, and then using that solar power energy would actually pump it up, and it would pretty much be a self-sustaining greenhouse. So that was my idea. I thought, it'd be solving hunger. It would be solving some of the food security issues, as well as trying to create that zero waste or zero water waste aspect as well. So I was lucky enough. They decided that my idea was a good one, or they kind of liked to create a 3-minute pitch. And myself and 4 other Canadians were sent down to Brasilia, Brazil last year in November, to pretty much present our ideas and then really join into a think tank. They put us in about groups of 10. So there was 100 other delegates there. They put us in groups of 10 with one rep from Bayer. And then we had all these people from 45 different countries there, pretty much to create this mixing pot of ideas. So one of the aspects that I really took away is, despite being in different countries from across the world, many of us are sharing some of the same agriculture issues, whether it's safe and affordable access to food, trying to reduce our emissions, or even trying to find ways to produce more food, or in countries or even in continents like Africa or even South America, sometimes the big challenge is, well, how do we provide technology access to smallholder farmers? They may be running equipment that's been from the 1960s, but most of them actually have a cell phone. So how do we use that cell phone technology to get them to create and produce modern day food using modern day farming methods? So there's a huge amount of takeaways, especially one of my highlights going down to Brazil was touring a 1-million-acre corporate farm. And it was the first time that I'd even toured a corporate farm to begin with. So I was pretty much I was in fangirl mode, really, to be quite honest with you. I mean, I couldn't believe it. It was hundreds of acres of farmland, and it was a completely new way of farming as well. I mean, the amount of technology that this farm, Agricola, was using was something that I'd never seen before. I mean, a lot of farmers are using precision ag, but the level that this farm took it to was nothing that I'd ever seen before. And it seemed this problem, well, they'd privately invest in that problem, and they'd find a way to solve it. They have weather stations on every single one of their fields, and they track exactly how much water has been rained in each field. And they actually even know, based on every single layer of soil, what's the maximum or the most efficient level of water that soil can take. So they really waste no irrigation water whatsoever, and they plant cover crops to try and mitigate the amount of baking that comes from the sun down in that region, and really try to preserve as much nutrients as possible, because their soil there is so poor. So I mean, it truly was a life-changing conference and event, and I really wouldn't change it for the world either. The amount of people that I met, and so many passionate young individuals that love agriculture as much as I do, and I didn't know it was as possible that someone would care as much about dirt or farming as me. So it was an amazing group to be a part of.
That's incredible. So, why do you think Brazil is in a different situation than we are? Are they trying to protect because their soils aren't quite as, nutrient? What word am I looking for? They're not as good as our soils. Is that why they're working so hard, or what was your take on that?
The way I saw it is in a country like Brazil, it seems like they're almost a country that's on polar opposites. In Canada, generally, we have every single farmer here has relatively similar farming methods and access to technology. But when we go into a country like Brazil, it's really almost quite the opposite. You have farms like Agricola that they farm over 1 million acres. They have access to pretty much every form of technology. They have discounts on equipment because they farm so many acres. Um,
Mhm.
they're so integrated into themselves that they can do almost anything and anything as long as it produces like an extra 2 cents to their bottom line. Whereas you have other these small holder farmers that are running older pieces of equipment that are still farming like we used to really in the 50s and 60s. So it's kind of a tough line to cross. So I think the way I see it is it's farms like that are doing really great, and that's fantastic, and they're certainly integrating technology. But for me, it's the focus that well, there are still farmers there that aren't farming to the level that they could be. So how do we provide them technology or help them get to that modern day farming aspect? So I think that's something that maybe even private corporations maybe could see as a way to help those farmers, or even government as well in that country, to try and find ways. Well, how do we bring them up to the level or to a level similar to that corporate farm? And the other aspect is because their profit margins are so low due to the way that they farm, they're really under threat of being taken over by these other large farms as well. So it's kind of that line do you cross? How do you look at it? Do you look at it as big anti bad corporate, or and you want to help the farmers survive, or do you look at it, well, they're helping push farming into a new era, and they're reducing their emissions at the same time, and producing more food than they could ever dream of. So I'm not too sure where I fall, but I think maybe the area that I fall in more is trying to provide better access to technology these smallholder farmers to try and upgrade their equipment without buying a new $700,000 four-wheel drive John Deere tractor. So and that's kind of the way I
Yeah.
look at it.
So obviously there was tons of different ideas that were presented there. You guys all had to come with your own idea. Besides yours, was there any that stood out to you?
Yeah, there were one of the most amazing ones that I saw was this girl from Australia, and she has a master's in plant science biology, I'm pretty sure. And what her idea was to she actually found a microbe that would take nitrogen out of the air, and then if you insert this microbe into say like a cotton plant, it'll take nitrogen out of the air and it'll fix it into the plant itself, so that the plant actually doesn't really have to take any nitrogen out of the soil. So by doing that, you're limiting the amount of nutrients they have to put into the soil, and you're also leaving more nutrients in the soil as well. So the plant actually doesn't have to rely on soil nutrients, it just has to actually take it out of the air. And for her stage, it was still very much in the beta stage. It was more of small farm trials, small plot trials, but she was actually seeing a lot of really great results. And she really, her whole goal was trying to move it from cotton over to rice to try and help smallholder farmers in those larger Asian type based countries, to try and help them produce more food. And I thought that was one of the coolest ways to utilize science, was to pretty much have microbes be inserted into those plants, and then hopefully one day get them to a point where they actually just attach to the plant, and the plant makes them naturally. But for now, unfortunately, you have to almost inject them into the plant. But I thought it was such a cool way to use technology, as well as trying to help out those smallholder farmers in those countries as well. And then even even another one is, it kind of feels like what I learned when I was down there was that one of the large problems with agriculture is that in some countries they produce enough food to feed their own population, but a large amount of it goes to waste through transport. So what this
Mm-hmm.
one young man decided to do was to create an algorithm and a system to pretty much create a supply chain system where, depending on what level of ripeness the fruit or vegetable was at, that kind of would determine where the truck would transport the food. Because sometimes in some countries, like in Indonesia, when they're transporting their food, it's pretty much ripe when they put it on the truck, and by the time it gets to that small town, it's been completely rotted. Well, there you not only are you losing
Mm-hmm.
money, but you're also losing food to waste. So I thought that was kind of a neat way to, depending on what the food looks like, that kind of determines where the food should be shipped to ensure that it isn't waste. So that was what those were two unbelievable ideas that I found, especially the one with cotton and rice from that young girl from Australia.
So, talking to lots of young producers from around the world, was there any? topics as a Canadian you felt that the world was kind of misconstruing about Canadian ag, or they weren't fully understanding?
Yeah, I think one of the main ones would actually have to be the way we farm today, using artificial fertilizers and spraying chemicals on our crops, that herbicides and fungicides and that sort of thing. Um, some of the delegates from some of the more Nordic type countries or people that were kind of from the EU in those areas, they weren't really so sold on that aspect of farming. They were really questioning why we had to use artificial fertilizers, and they're kind of saying that using artificial fertilizers due to the amount of leaching, in their opinion, it wasn't safe for the environment. Or when we were spraying chemicals, that wasn't needed either, and that's been kind of pushed onto farmers by big corporations. So it was trying to have that conversation where farmers in Canada, as well as in many countries, we're still completely under control of our farms. And the reason why we do what we do is to produce the safest and most affordable food in the entire world. So I think it was one of those areas where you mentioned that there's friction on both sides, but in a very healthy way where they would talk about their opinions and then you could offer yours as well. And maybe we don't come to the same conclusion, but we were able to both listen to each other's sides and then form our own opinions. And I think for me it was kind of neat because from this gentleman, he was really talking about how small farming was maybe better for the environment, which I still obviously disagree on. But his focus was really actually on mushroom farming and that sort of thing. Um, so when I look at it, that we did have a good conversation, and I don't think we both came to the same conclusion. But I think that was one of the main things to talk about was, especially in the EU, they're not really as sold on sound science as we are. And it was just trying to have those conversations and explain from a farmer perspective with boots on the ground. This is how farmers farm, and everything that we do is backed by science. And if it wasn't safe, we wouldn't be doing it because we eat the exact same food that we produce. So it's just having conversations like that. But I think that was one of the big misconceptions or disagreements that I maybe had. And but it's just those kind of conversations that I almost enjoy more because I love hearing other people's opinions about agriculture, and we are able to have a great dialogue too.
Well, and it's incredible that you were able to have those conversations. I mean, if only we could convince our world leaders to just be able to have those conversations, like it's amazing what communication does. So that's incredible you were able to experience that, and like you said, it's not that we all have to agree on different things. It's just a matter of having the conversation. So we have a question coming in here from Lindsay, and she says, "What are your most interesting international issues re agriculture covered in class so far?"
Okay, well, that's a pretty good question. Um, I would say one of the most interesting agriculture topics, in my opinion, would have to be our trade with countries like with China. I think that's something where, for me, it really intersects two of my favorite things, both policy and politics, and really how they're pretty much able to really control trade because they're quite a large trading partner with Canada. And the other aspect is do action in their country. They certainly do have a lot of pull economically, especially with putting tariffs on our products. So I think that's one of my favorite issues to kind of watch and look at and see kind of how that plays out. Because right now it seems like things are quiet once again. Markets are starting to open back up, but the Huawei executive is still going through the court system, and depending really on how that turns out, that will once again kind of determine our relationship with China. So I think that's one of my most interesting favorite things to follow is how does policy and politics interact in all these different countries, and how does that? It seems like at the end of the day, it seems like it always affects agriculture as one of the main businesses. I mean, if I'm Sally or Jake, it seems like things like this don't really affect a small business as much as they do agriculture. I think maybe that's one of the misconceptions even from an urban perspective is how deeply rooted agriculture is in our systems and even in our economy as well, and how it's such an easy target to try and get the way you want from a different country's perspective as well. So I think that's one of the things that we've examined in class significantly is Canada's partnership with China, and even opportunities to export to other nations, to export our raw products to those continents like Africa, whether that's South Africa or North Africa, and how do we get our products into those countries as well, and to try and navigate some of the blockades that have been put up in the past too. So I would say those have been some of my favorite things to look at by far, because it's such a neat thing to look at too.
Absolutely. And I think it's huge that you understand the difference between policy and politics. Do you think that's something that your fellow classmates see, or is that something that really has to be driven home?
I think it's something that I would say it almost has to be learned in class in a way. I think the only reason I look at it that way, the way I do, is due to the amount of conversations my parents and I have had at the dinner table. It seems like, and we do ask each other about each other's day, but it's mostly also about what are the markets looking at like too, because both my mom and dad, they're both kind of policy and politic nerds as well, and that's kind of rubbed off on me. I think that's kind of the good thing about school, though, is um, our profs are really able to put their opinions on us, and not really their opinions, but their opinions on these subjects, and we're able to form our own opinions on it. So when it comes to things like, well, how do we differentiate the difference between policy and politics, and but how do they also interact? And I think that's probably been one of the neatest things about going to universities, the amount of different ideas that I've been able to experience, especially in, when I was in my first year, I took a intro to political science class, and I went in hardlined on some views, but then on others, I was, I've softened down a little bit, and I've even been able to change my perspective as well, because I've agreed with someone else, and their ideas were neat to me anyway. So I think from looking at other students, I think that's been the good thing about school, though, is certainly trying to find those aspects and those differences in those two subjects as well.
So, speaking of your parents, like you said, they're very kind of active in the policy and political side in Alberta. Can you talk a bit about how have you ever felt as if not that they pushed you to be a part of politics, but are they the reason you kind of are interested in the path you are?
I would say that they've certainly played a role, but I think the way that my parents always took it is, they said, you can do whatever you like to do. This is what we're interested in. And our whole goal here is to really just show you different aspects, whether that is the agriculture industry. But growing up until I was about 14 or 15, I was sold on the fact that I was going to become a geologist and then go and work in the oil and gas industry. Growing up, I loved
Mm.
rocks. But that idea didn't plan out, and the way oil and gas looks in this province and in Canada in general, I guess I'm glad I didn't end up taking that route, because I did find agriculture as a passion. But even, I remember when I was, I'd be 10 or even 11 years old. I'd come home from a soccer game, and I knew that the debate between Stephen Harper would be up, because at that time he was running to become the prime minister again. And I would turn on the debate, and I would sit there as an 11 or 12-year old, and I'd watch that debate. And I think when I would look at my other classmates at that time in elementary, that they weren't doing those types of things. So I think my parents did play a role, but I think it was also, for me, it was just self-driven. It was things like that that really interested me. I got excited about debates. I got excited about hearing different people's opinions on different subjects, especially when they talked about things I was passionate about at that age. So I think for me, it was just, I don't know what happened. Maybe it was the environment I grew up in, but even from a young age, I think it just rubbed off, and I just kind of found that passion myself, I think.
I remember when I got to my first year of broadcasting school, and I'd grown up the same way. Like, my dad and I watched the news every single night. Like, I remember I was more excited to turn 18 because I could vote. That was like the exciting thing. And I remember when I went to my first year of college, and I like finally all these political geeks around me were just like, "Do you guys want to go to the bar and watch the election?" I'm like, "Yes, yes, I do." And that was just like the best thing ever. So, no, I get you there. As a young producer, what do you think is some of the biggest blockades you face going forward?
I think one of the from a producer perspective, I think one of the biggest aspects I see of trying to start farming would have to be, the farm succession aspect. I think that's always a topic that every young producer thinks about, and I know certainly going to the U of L and being a part of their agriculture club. I think, back, pre-COVID, whenever we go and have a beer or something, I think that would be one of the first things that would always come up, would just be talking about our own farms, and, well, what is your family doing for farm succession, or how are you going to find a way to start farming? And I think that that's probably one of the big aspects that myself and probably other young producers look at is, well, how do we start farming and how do we get into it? And how do we talk to our parents or even grandparents about having those conversations to maybe one day setting up the farm to where we can start working. So I think that's certainly a blocking aspect. And I think the other one would be, it seems like with profit margins on our farms really narrowing, it seems like day by day, and equipment becoming so expensive, and same with land, I guess, depending on where you farm. The aspect is, well, maybe farming conventionally isn't the way that we as young producers should be going. How can we, do a value added product? Instead of just producing malt barley and selling it to a maltster, why don't we malt our own barley and create our own brewery? Or why don't we create our own loaves of bread? I think for me, that's what a lot of young producers are seeing as maybe a different way into agriculture. Or, it seems like when we look at social media, there are influencers everywhere, and maybe that's something that we as young producers are looking at as well. Maybe it's time to speak up and maybe form that as an income, speaking up for agriculture and trying to show other young producers that it's good to talk about agriculture and to spread the good news that we do each and every day on our farm. So I think the way as young producers we look at it is, there are blocks to entering the agriculture industry, but I think the way that we've grown up is whenever we've been faced with a challenge, we don't really look at it in a negative light. We look at it as a positive. Well, how do we overcome that? How do you overcome?
Mhm.
Maybe there isn't room on the farm. So maybe we should do a value added product instead and make our own room rather than rely on our parents or grandparents to give us that room. Now, I'm not saying that that's how it is on our farm, but I think that's just in general from talks with um, other classmates. I think that's the way that they've been feeling. I think that's the way I feel as well too. So I think that, in my opinion, those are some of the big blocks that we're facing. But I think the other aspect is there companies and even producer groups have been giving youth a lot more opportunities to speak up, which I think has been absolutely phenomenal. I mean, to show a 12-year-old that there is more to farming than just being a producer, that there are a huge amount of other aspects to agriculture, whether that is that policy or being a commodity trading person or something like that. I think that's probably one of the most valuable aspects because maybe they're not into producing grain or producing cattle or being a part of the dairy farm or the poultry or chicken business. Maybe they want to do something else that's still connected to agriculture. So I think by people reaching out to that younger generation, especially when they're 12, 10, and just showing them what's out there. I know for me personally, that's what's really shaped me to be the person that I am today, is seeing that there is more to agriculture than just farming, and there's nothing wrong with that too.
Absolutely, and that's a very good point. But on the flip side, there's a lack of people interested in the agriculture industry. I know it's a big people working in ag is a big problem right now. How do we get that message out to young producers that, well, young people that aren't producers yet or are not in the agriculture industry yet? How do we show them that there is opportunity for them in ag, even if they didn't grow up on the farm?
I think I love that you brought that up because that's something that I've faced with, like, the roommate that I have down in Lethbridge. He comes from Calgary as well, and he grew up in a city, and he's in finance. And I always tell him, hey, maybe you should think about a career in agriculture. I mean, there's always opportunities in agriculture, and there's always looking for jobs. But it seems like when we always have our conversation together, the one thing he always says is, "Well, I'm not from agriculture. I don't know anything about farming." I always say, "Well, that's totally a-okay." In fact, companies are now realizing that, and that's really the goal. There are so many opportunities in ag and careers in agriculture that people that grew up on a farm, as you even noted, Kara, there aren't enough jobs. There are too many careers almost for producers to even do. So I find it's always talking to people that come from the city and saying, no, maybe instead of working for that oil and gas company like you planned on doing with your finance or accounting degree, maybe you should try and go work for a more agriculture based firm. Because even when we've seen with the rise of COVID, because it's an essential industry, agriculture doesn't stop. Seeding, the seed still has to go on the ground. We still have to harvest. We still have to export our grain. So those industries don't stop. So really, there is no possibility almost for a downturn. So that's the way I kind of pitch it as well, as it's really a safe career to do. And the companies will understand and realize that maybe you don't come from a farming background, but they'll provide you with the training and the tools that you need to be able to go and work in that agriculture industry with that agriculture career. So it's a conversation that I have with my roommate all the time. Hopefully one day he will join the agriculture industry with me and with his finance degree. But I think that the point that I really try to hit home is you don't need an agriculture background to work in ag. Certainly it is an asset, but it's never needed. And most of the training that it seems like you get when you do graduate, it comes from your employer. So that's kind of the way I look at it. Your employer will provide you the tools that you need to succeed. And all you need to do is just take that first step in applying and creating an application as well. And maybe the other aspect we have to think about is from a corporation perspective, it's really trying to push your company into that more urban space as well and trying to show them and maybe even headhunt in those more urban areas to try and find those smart, intelligent, driven people to come work for your company as well. So I think it's a double-edged sword there. It's talking to people from our urban centers, but it's also getting corporations to also reach out to those urban areas or even farms as well and say, hey, why don't you come work for me? I'll teach you everything you need to know too.
Yeah, and just taking the time to actually teach, because I think there's still a disconnect to that. It's if you're, I don't know, like I've heard the term city it before, like, oh, you grew up in this city, so you can't possibly know anything about ag. So I think it's both sides. I mean, I went to University of Calgary and I walked around in my cowboy boots and people looked at me like I was nuts. So there's two sides of it as well, but I there is so much opportunity out there, and I know on behalf of the agriculture industry, we are really appreciative of people like you, Emmett, that are wanting to get that word out and really talk to people and explain why agriculture is so great. So thank you very much for your time today. It was wonderful to have you on the show.
No problem. Well, thanks, Kara. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thanks for all of you that tuned in today. It was great to have you along for the ride. It's always exciting, and we have so many different conversations on here. That's what's great. We're live. We are able to have your comments and questions, but also we have so many different people on all the time. Sometimes like today it was Emmett, it was a young producer, and sometimes we have market analysts, and we have all sorts of you come up with the topic and we'll bring it to you. So thank you very much, and we always appreciate it. And speaking of RealAg Live, tomorrow we will have our last one kind of to wrap up the year, I believe. I will be hosting it again, and we will have Christian Hebert on to talk about his farm and his theories on farm management, as well as an outlook for 2021. So be sure to join along with me and Christian tomorrow at 1 p.m. Mountain or 3 p.m. Eastern on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or Twitch. Thanks for joining in, and we will talk to you guys soon.